Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for another mock draft Monday. It's my favorite day of the week and I hope you guys continue enjoying the mock draft process this draft cycle. Of course, one of my favorite things about this is talking through a variety of possibilities. It really helps me wrap my mind around where certain prospects could end up. And then that way on draft night, I've already envisioned and imagined so many different scenarios that it's a lot of fun to kind of live out and think through as we go throughout the process. If you guys do enjoy all of the content, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and let's jump forward here to my Dallas Mavericks. I am a Dallas Mavericks fan. Now, did they deserve the first overall pick? The answer to that is a probable no, but if you're a Mavs fan, you definitely deserved it. The Mavs fan base has been through a lot over the last few months or so, and the first overall pick, very obviously in this year's draft, will be Cooper Flagg out of Duke. And I think this is a tremendous opportunity for the Dallas Mavericks to really cement their roster and lineup moving forward. Now, there's questions about what they'll do at the point guard spot, especially in Kyrie Irving's absence with that ACL injury that he will be recovering from to begin next season. But I think all things considered for the Mavericks, Cooper Flagg is going to be one of the primary ball handlers, one of the primary offensive initiators for this team as soon as next season. And I think that's a really promising sign for the Mavericks' direction for a team that traded away a 25, now 26-year-old superstar in Luka Doncic, who had such a high usage and carried so much of the offensive weight for this Mavs team over the last 6+ years. I think Mavs fans are going to get to see a new style of play where instead of spamming high middle ball screens and isolations and trying to get mismatched switches, the Mavs are going to be able to play a little bit more of a bully ball version of offense where they look to feed the post, play out of high-low scenarios, something that Davis and Gafford were quite good at together. And I think going forward, you can see some of that pairing with maybe Flagg and Lively. I think one of the important things to kind of call back on was the effectiveness of someone like Khaman Maluach for Duke playing next to Cooper Flagg and how much that rim gravity and lob threat played an advantage for Flagg as a passer. The Mavs are already equipped with not one but two bigs who can really catch lobs, three if you count Anthony Davis in there. So I think all things considered here for the Mavericks, they already have a very good supporting cast around Cooper Flagg. This is one of the landing spots where the team is ready to compete now, and that's very atypical for a first overall pick. You aren't necessarily seeing these players land in a destination or a city or situation where they get to try and win at a high level immediately. The Mavericks here are kind of that precursor for Flagg, where he gets to go to a team already kind of built out, and he gets to exert himself into that system where he gets to be on the ball, especially early with Kyrie Irving's absence. And then going forward, he gets to be utilized in a variety of ways, whether it's him screening and playing out of short rolls or playing off the catch, something he didn't get to do a ton of at Duke, but definitely is capable of. I do think there are some flaws in Cooper Flagg's game that people are kind of rushing under the rug a little bit because they're just so enamored with who he is as a prospect. And for good reason. He is just a tremendous, well-rounded prospect, one of the best prospects we've had in the last 5-10 years. But there are some concerns. He only shot about 51.7% on twos this past season for Duke. And I think one of the biggest reasons for that is some deficiencies in his handle, specifically with the face-up game, inability to beat guys just cleanly off the bounce and create separation downhill. Obviously, at times too, it's because defenses are honing in on him. So I think there's going to be a little bit of relief there in Dallas having such big lob threats behind the defensive line that's trying to wall him up, and then also some shooting around him when Kyrie's back healthy with Klay Thompson's presence. The Mavericks do have some pieces to at least mitigate some of Cooper Flagg's early concerns and struggles in the beginning of his career, but all things considered here, this is a no-brainer selection. Cooper Flagg is by far and away the number one player on my draft board. He should be the number one player on every single person's draft board, even if you're really high on some of the other prospects like Dylan Harper, Ace Bailey. Cooper Flagg is just far and away the best player in this year's draft class. Moving on to pick number 2, the San Antonio Spurs here, a team that I think is destined for greatness. Of course, landing Victor Wembanyama, the number 1 overall pick in the 2023 NBA draft, really set this team up for success. And with all the reports going around right now that Wembanyama is going to be back healthy as soon as the beginning of next season, I think that's a really great optimistic sign moving forward for San Antonio. And now they have an opportunity here with not one but two lottery picks in this year's draft to surround him with more talent. They, of course, went out at the trade deadline, acquired De'Aaron Fox. They have the reigning Rookie of the Year now, Stephon Castle, as well. Jeremy Sohan, I think, is an underrated player around the league. Devin Vassell, I think, has some significant value as a catch-and-shoot ace for them. If they do keep him, they obviously have some flexibility if they want to explore trades. But second overall, I have the San Antonio Spurs here selecting Dylan Harper out of Rutgers. This is a foregone conclusion at this point that Flagg and Harper will be the 1 and 2 picks in this year's draft, respectively. And I think for San Antonio specifically, if you're a Spurs fan and you want to know about the fit of Dylan Harper, first of all, I have a video out on the channel breaking down his fit with San Antonio. But then secondly, look at the NBA playoffs right now. The teams with more ball handling, the teams with more perimeter talent, the teams with more skill are the teams going a long ways in the postseason. It's a very obvious outcome. The best teams have the best players who have the best ball handlers, who have the best creators for others. The Spurs have an opportunity here to continue adding more perimeter talent, more connectivity, more passing, more playmaking without jeopardizing their long-term defense because of Stephon Castle's defensive versatility. Dylan Harper has guarded up through the lineup in his time at Rutgers. Even one game defended Will Riley for pretty much the entire duration of their matchup against Illinois. So he's guarded bigger wings, he's guarded longer athletes, and he's done quite well in those matchups even at times. I think for the Spurs, you have enough defensive versatility here, and of course one of the best anchors in the NBA in Victor Wembanyama to kind of protect that back end for you too, even if you are just a little bit smaller at the 2 and 3 spots in your lineup. So I think moving forward, the Spurs rotation of their guard play is going to be tremendous. They're going to have a lot of talented ball handling, playmaking, and decision making, and I think when you have those traits, you can effectively run read and react offense, which makes you very, very difficult to guard on a night-to-night basis because you have players who are just taking what the defense is giving you and finding success as a result of that. Moving on to pick number 3, the Philadelphia 76ers here now, and this is where the draft starts to get really interesting. Could Philadelphia, who drafted a guard last year in Jared McCain, double dip at the position and come back here and look at someone like VJ Edgecombe, who is a very different style of wing than Jared McCain. McCain obviously more of a shooting archetype with his relocation skills and a very, very pretty jump shot. And then you also look at VJ Edgecombe, someone who is very physically gifted, can jump out of the gym. His functional athleticism shows up in his steal and block rates, where he was very impactful on the defensive end of the floor as a defensive playmaker, and I think has significant upside to grow in as a defender. Or do they look at kind of the bigger forward wing prospect with some shot-making talent in Ace Bailey? And I think this is a tricky topic, a tricky conversation for Philadelphia to figure out and decide ultimately. But third overall in this mock draft, I have the 76ers selecting Ace Bailey out of Rutgers. And the reason for that selection specifically is the fact that they do probably have some internal beliefs still about Jared McCain, who they took last year in the top 20. Had a very strong rookie season before ultimately getting hurt and missing the remainder of the season. And I think they're looking at the upside perspective here too, where a lot of people, not myself included, but a lot of people do view Ace Bailey as a potential star candidate down the road, someone who can put the ball in the hoop. Now, he didn't do it consistently at Rutgers, but some of the moments, some of the makes are very, very loud, where they stand out in a big way and you say, wow, this kid can really shoot it. Especially if you're only watching highlight reels, you're going to come away very, very impressed. Now, if you watch full games, there's going to be moments where you're going to say, what is this kid doing? I think that's fair. He's a very, very young prospect. There's still a lot of room and time for him to grow as a player. I think that's one of the most important things to keep in mind here. I try to keep these mock drafts pretty optimistic, and the biggest reason for that, these are 18, 19, 20-year-old kids we're talking about. They have room to grow yet. There's a lot of time for them to learn. I think they're going to need more experience. I think Ace Bailey's really at the center of that in this year's draft, where he's just not a true winning NBA contributor right now, day one of his career. And that's what makes this tricky for Philadelphia. Do you try and go 2 timelines and stagger the future after Joel Embiid? Or do you try and maximize Joel Embiid right now, which would be maybe trading this pick or looking to maybe trade down, get a more ready player at, like, say, pick 5, 6, 7, or 8 in this draft? It's a really, really tricky decision, but one that I do think Philadelphia is ready to make a move on and ultimately decide that if they do stick and pick Ace Bailey, they are going to still be happy with the long-term result of getting another lengthy athletic wing who can have a defensive and rebounding impact at the very least in the NBA. Pick number 4, the Charlotte Hornets now here on the clock, and I just got done talking about Edgecombe a couple minutes ago for Philadelphia and how I thought he would have been an interesting fit, especially with his defensive impact that he's had in the creation rate standpoint of getting involved in passing lanes, on the ball, picking guys' pockets, of course, rotating over as a low man at times, blocking shots at the rim, a few chase down blocks in transition. So fourth overall, the Charlotte Hornets here select VJ Edgecombe out of Baylor. I think they're going to take a swing at that upside, specifically on the defensive end of the floor, something Charlotte needs to get a lot better at. I actually thought Charles Lee did a very good job this past year of trying to maximize the defensive talent he had in Charlotte. Their team was actually playing quite well to start the season, considering their talent. Now, some injuries, roster turnover kind of changed that a little bit throughout the course of the year, but their defense was semi-competitive, and I think that's an impressive thing, especially since Brandon Miller missed so much time, LaMelo Ball misses so much time, and also is just proven to be a bad defender so far early in his NBA career. They don't really have any true consistent rim protection. I mean, they were playing Nique Richards and Mark Williams significant minutes, and neither of them are good defenders at this point in time. Of course, Nique Richards got traded. I think Charlotte specifically, what they really need, and you look at some of the best teams in the NBA right now, the Pacers, the Knicks, the Thunder, of course, the Timberwolves, they all have some form of premier point of attack defense, whether it's OKC with their entire roster seemingly, which is what makes them so special as a defensive unit. Otherwise, you go across the board and you look at, what Aaron Nesmith has been for Indiana. You look at what Jaden McDaniels has provided for Minnesota. You look at Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, some of those guys who've been impactful defenders throughout their career. You need bodies to throw at the star players in the league, and VJ Edgecombe has a very strong frame to him. He's built like an NBA player and has a really special dose of athleticism, which can make him a very special defensive player long term. Now, I don't think he's ready to be a stopper night one of his NBA career. I think there's going to be a lot more growth that has to happen yet. But then there's also some offensive potential to grow into for Scott Drew, who's running off of off-ball screens, doing some stuff that he probably won't be asked to do too much in the NBA. But he did find some success as a driver. He was a very confident shooter at Baylor, pretty solid three-point attempt rate, which I thought was a big standout for me, something I wasn't sure if I was going to see or not his freshman season, but he showcased that all year long. So the Hornets definitely getting a boom or bust pick here, in my opinion, a bit. Someone who has significant upside that they could grow and blossom into. It's going to take a while to get there, but the Hornets seem set on the patient, cautious approach long-term anyway. So with that in mind, the Hornets take that pick here of VJ Edgecombe at number 4. Moving on to pick number 5, the Utah Jazz here. Of course, pretty devastating for Utah. They had the worst record in the NBA. The lowest that they could possibly pick was number 5. And the lottery just did not bless them. They moved all the way down to their lowest possible outcome at pick 5. They had a 47.9% chance of this outcome, though, so it wasn't unexpected. It was a very real possibility. Unfortunately for them, though, that's how it played out. But 5th overall, they still have a wide variety of options and ways to improve their team. And they're going to go with a little bit of wing scoring upside here. 5th overall, the Utah Jazz select Trey Johnson out of Texas. And I think specifically what Trey Johnson is going to bring to Utah is someone who can really put the basketball in the hoop, and he can shoot the ball, stretch the floor. One thing that Utah already has right now is a plethora of play finishers. And I think this pick for Utah is going to tell us a lot about how they envision their team building going forward. Right now, I think the Jazz have a lot of guys who can be solid pieces off of a true 1A player. The issue is the Jazz do not have that 1A player. They're not even close to having that 1A player right now. So the question is, at 5, do they try and take a stab at someone like Jeremiah Fears, who maybe has a little bit more playmaking juice, on-ball talent than someone like Trey Johnson, but has been significantly less effective off the ball and just doesn't have the same track record of success as a scorer as Trey Johnson does to begin with? Or do they go with someone like Trey Johnson, who does have some on-ball scoring capabilities, definitely isn't a slouch with the ball in his hands, but probably best is suited to be a second scorer for a team, or kind of an off-ball catch-and-shoot threat who can do a little bit with the ball in his hands off of isolation or out of, pre-designed action, ball screens. I think that's the tricky part here for Utah is which way do you want to go? Do you try and line up for the 2026 NBA draft and hope you can walk away with one of Cam Boozer, Darren Peterson, AJ DeBonsa? Or do you ultimately try and take that swing now on someone like Jeremiah Fears and hope that the upside hits? That's going to be a tricky discussion, a tricky topic. If you're a Jazz fan, I want to know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Make sure to comment who you want your Jazz to pick at number 5, because I am really open to suggestions and ideas here on who you guys think Utah will take, because right now, I've kind of pivoted back and forth a lot. I feel like this 5th spot's really up for grabs right now in this draft class. Trey Johnson does seem to be gaining some steam as kind of this secondary scoring option for a team who can shoot the basketball, has a very safe floor, I think, all things considered. So it's an interesting topic of discussion for sure, but I think for Utah, Trey Johnson at number 5, I think is a really good building block going into the future iterations of this team, where they're still missing, yes, that 1A caliber player, but once they get that guy, they're ready to compete and win ASAP. Moving on to pick number 6, the Washington Wizards here now at this spot. And with Trey Johnson off the board and the fact that they drafted Bub Carrington last year in the lottery after trading away Denny Avdia, I don't know if the Wizards would be looking for a point guard, so to speak. So we are going to stray away from Jeremiah Fears in this selection. Instead, 6th overall, I have the Washington Wizards selecting wing Knueppel out of Duke. This is another player who really could go in that 5 to 7 draft range. I think the Jazz would consider him at number 5, and I ultimately do have the Wizards picking him at number 6 here, because what I think they already have in place is a very good long-term defensive infrastructure around him. I don't think Knueppel is going to be a terrible NBA defender. Do I think he has the upside to be an elite one? Definitely not. There are some athletic disadvantages that he will face throughout his career, and at times will be very, very evident and obvious and problematic. But for the most part, I mean, he held up very, very well for Duke in the ACC on a really great team that went all the way to the Final Four. If he had significant limitations athletically that were really damaging, I think we would have seen them at a higher extent than we have up to this point. So I think for Washington, you're getting a player who can be a really elite play finisher, one of the more decisive off-ball players in this draft, who has a plethora of off-ball movement shooting skills, has been used in a variety of ways off of pins and staggers, ghost screens, on-ball action, where he's running ball screens even. He's just been used in so many different ways. He's got a very diverse play style chart, and I think when it comes down to what he's going to be able to do for Washington, it's fill a lot of gaps that they need. Someone who puts the ball in the hole at a good rate. One of the best shooters in this year's draft is Knueppel. He's going to be extremely valuable for them in that role, but he's more than just a shooter because of his ability to play off of 2 feet, play into traffic, avoiding turnovers. He's very turnover averse, which I think is really positive for a guy in his archetype who's going to be able to score, put the ball on the deck a bit without being a real negative to their offense. I think this is a winning type of player, a guy who's going to have a really solid impact when it comes to the win-loss record over time. Now, it's not going to happen year one for Washington. This team's still going to be in position next year for another top pick potentially. We'll see how everything shakes out, of course, but the Wizards get Knueppel here. I feel like he's a very strong infrastructural piece to a team identity that's already building up their defensive nucleus quite well with Coulibaly and Sarr, and I think going forward, if you add in a wing shooter like Knueppel, you're going to really pull out some good value out of this pick at number 6. Pick number 7, the New Orleans Pelicans here now. And I think for New Orleans, again, you're kind of looking point guard or center. There's a wide variety of ways that New Orleans could look. You could go the skilled big approach with Derik Queen, who I think would work quite well with their dribble handoff system. Otherwise, you could go with Khaman Maluach, who did get that experience at Duke playing in that kind of offensive structure. Now, it wasn't the most natural thing for him. You can tell he's probably best suited to screen and roll, dive to the rim, catch lobs. But I think there's opportunities there for New Orleans off of Zion Williamson if they do want to play that style of basketball. And then you also look at the guard spot. CJ McCollum's going into the final year of his deal. DeJounte Murray's coming off of a torn Achilles. The Pelicans have a lot of questions. 7th overall, we're going to try to address one of them here by selecting Jeremiah Fears out of Oklahoma. This is an on-ball prospect, a guy who there's a lot of optimism around the long-term growth and potential, and I think a lot of that stems from his ability to create space and get downhill. He has arguably the best handle in this year's draft. I do have a slight preference toward Dylan Harper. I think there's a little bit more downhill functionality in Dylan Harper's handle, and I think he has the better play finishing skills to make the most of that. But I do think Jeremiah Fears is right in that conversation. He's extremely electric, very quick with the ball in his hands. It just feels very hard for defenders to stay in front of him. And his pick and roll reps are very, very good as a ball handler as well in terms of the overall process. Now, you might be saying, okay, with all of that, why is Jeremiah Fears not a top 3 or 4 pick in this draft? Well, the actual numbers and the data don't suggest he's been great at finishing off some of those plays. He only shot 28% on threes this past year for Oklahoma on very high volume. And I just think, with all things considered, like, Fears, for me, is a player who is going to run into the problem long term of, okay, he's an on-ball creator. He's a guy you're going to put the ball in his hands. Is he good enough for you to win as a team that way? And it's one of the trickiest things about drafting, right? There are a lot of players who are very skilled, very talented players, but maybe they're not good enough at the NBA level to justify that play style, that player archetype. And it kind of diminishes their value and diminishes their role at the next level. Now, I think for Fears, very, very safe bet that he's at very worst a sixth man. But that is an archetype that has been dying out in the NBA recently. You don't see a lot of the Lou Williams, Jamal Crawfords anymore. I think Peyton Pritchard's probably the best example of that in today's game. But even then, he's, you're looking at an elite three-point shooter. That's one of Peyton Pritchard's biggest selling points, is that he can really shoot the three ball. Jeremiah Fears hasn't been able to do that so far. But again, he's young. He reclassified up. He's playing in the SEC as a high-volume ball handler. I'm not going to fret too much about the actual numbers. I do think that there is a lot to work with here. It's going to take a year or 2 or maybe 3 for him to really start to hone in those skills and become effective enough to be a starting caliber point guard in the NBA. But I think realistically here for New Orleans, I think that works out well with their timeline anyway. They still have McCollum for that final season like I talked about. We'll see if he gets traded this year or not. And then you also have DeJounte Murray coming back from injury. So the Pelicans, they don't really need Jeremiah Fears on day one to be a starter. They just want to probably groom him along, bring him up as a player. And I think putting him into a dribble handoff type of system with zoom action under Borrego's offensive system, I think there's a lot of growth that can happen for him as an individual player when it comes to off-ball movement, understanding when to cut, when not to, and being a little bit more decisive without the ball in his hands to best make use of it when he does actually have the ball and is making reads with a live handle. Moving on to pick number 8, the Brooklyn Nets here. Now at this spot, Brooklyn has 4 first-round picks, and they are definitely a team to watch for via trade. We'll see if Giannis ever asks out of Milwaukee, and if so, does he end up in Brooklyn? We'll see what happens there. But 8th overall here, I have the Brooklyn Nets selecting guard Kasparas Jakucionis out of Illinois. And I feel like this is a really solid build-up piece for the Nets. Not a build-around piece, but a build-up piece. And I think Brooklyn right now, if you look at their roster, there's a lot of questions. Will Cam Johnson be there next year or not? Will Nick Claxton be there next year or not? The Nets also have pretty significant need for guard play. You look at their roster right now, of course, Cam Thomas is a restricted free agent. D'Angelo Russell, they have a pretty significant $28 million cap hold there. Could they bring him back at a cheaper number? I definitely think he won't be making $28 million next year. I guarantee you that. I think for Brooklyn, going with the guard prospect here in Jakucionis, who's very adept at making reads. One of my favorite things about him as a player is his decisiveness and his kind of action off the basketball, whether it's cutting when he's getting denied or just being really quick and really intentional with all of his off-ball movement. When it comes to going to get the basketball, he's decisive in it. He doesn't lollygag. He's not going to walk to do something. Everything's a sprint and everything's an effort. And I like that about him a lot as a prospect. And I think, for me, someone who focuses so much on the skills and the actual tools and everything, like sometimes like those little details like effort and multiple efforts and kind of setting things up in a way, using some of his intelligence and just reading what the team defense is giving him. There's just a lot of little nuance in there that I think makes Kasparas Jakucionis who he is as a prospect. And I think for Brooklyn at number 8, specifically, again, this is not a build-around player. This is not going to be a 1A player on a championship caliber team ever. But this is a guy who can be a very good facilitator and offensive initiator for you. And I think that's something Brooklyn is definitely lacking. And they have picks 19, 26, and 27 to maybe start building an infrastructure around Jakucionis if they want to go the patient approach where they just take their time and build up their team in a slower fashion. We'll see what they do, but Jakucionis I think is a good starting point for them on draft night at number 8. Pick number 9, the Toronto Raptors here now. And for Toronto, a very spendy starting lineup, obviously with Jakucionis, Scotty Barnes, RJ Barrett, Brandon Ingram, and Emmanuel Quickley. They have a lot of money committed to that starting 5. They also have some solid contributors off the bench. You look at someone like Grady Dick, Jacoby Walter. There's some players there. Long-term Jonathan Mogbo is a guy who I liked a bit last year in his draft class. 9 is an opportunity here for Toronto to add into their front court and specifically continue building on that defensive infrastructure that they've already kind of got in place, where toward the end of the season they started playing much, much better defensively. And 9th overall here, I have the Toronto Raptors selecting center Khaman Maluach out of Duke, and I think this is one of the better landing spots for him, even though the spacing's a little tricky right now, and I don't think the Raptors are really in their final form yet when it comes to winning games at a super high level and getting deep in the playoffs. I do think right now what they have is a very good infrastructure to protect Maluach as he learns and as he adjusts to the NBA game. He had a very, very strong defensive cast around him at Duke, and I think that really maximized his defensive rim protection value. It maximized his drop coverage with really great screen navigation in the college game. And I also think at times when he was able to switch out on the perimeter and John Shire let him kind of play more of a free style of defense, what the Blue Devils had behind him was Cooper Flagg and other really good athletes to protect him at the rim. And I think Toronto has kind of similar characteristics, right? You have Scotty Barnes, who's one of the better defensive playmakers, just a really unique, good defender in general. You have another rim protector in Jakucionis. You don't need Maluach to play 30 minutes a night. I think he's going to be a 20 to 24 minute per game player in year 1 of his career, which is perfectly fine there in Toronto, and I think balances out their center play really, really well. I think this is a real step toward winning for Toronto. And then offensively, you're also getting an elite screen setter, an elite rim finisher. I think, a much more vertical presence than Jakucionis. Poeltl wins a lot with his spacing and positioning, not spacing in terms of out to the three-point line, but you guys know what I'm saying. The off-ball positioning, playing in the pocket, winning with touch, and I think Maluach, I think it has a very underrated element of touch in his game, but you're going to be able to weaponize that screen setting, the rim rolling, and the lob threat rim gravity that he can be off the ball, and I think Toronto's a really fun landing spot for him. I do think this is a home run pick for the Raptors if they make this selection. I have Maluach currently 4th on my big board this year. I think this is a home run selection for Toronto at this spot. Pick number 10, the Houston Rockets here at this spot. And for the most part, we have looked at shooting at this pick for Houston. Of course, Knueppel has been a rather popular target for me after the lottery. If he does fall to number 10, he would be brilliant for the Houston Rockets. But I think it's important to consider other outcomes. And instead of just highlighting guys who are shooters and movement shooters, how about we highlight athletes who can shoot? And I think there's a pretty definite distinction between those two things. But at number 10, we have the Houston Rockets here going with Carter Bryant out of Arizona. And this is an example of an athlete who can shoot the ball. Very low usage player at Arizona in his freshman season. I believe he just had a 16.7% usage rate, which is pretty comparable to rim running centers, very comparable usage to someone like Khaman Maluach. And Carter Bryant did it in low minutes, very low per game stats. You might be saying, how is this guy going top 10 then? Well, a lot of the rate-based numbers are very, very good for him, and I think the potential and the size is very, very promising as well moving forward. I think he's got a frame very, very similar. I'm talking about like shoulders and arms and just his overall body frame to Jason Tatum. Now, he's not quite as big as Jason Tatum in terms of his sheer height and length, but he is a very, very good athlete and someone who projects to be an NBA caliber player for a long time in this league because of his functionality as a cutter. He shot over 70% at the rim in the half court this year for Arizona, which I think is very, very strong. And if you're looking at someone who can be a really good cutter off of Alperen Sengun, we know how well the Rockets utilize the dunker spot, and Sengun is a short roller. Carter Bryant has significant functionality in that already. But then he also connected on over 37% of his threes for Arizona. Now, is this a guy that you're going to consistently run off the three-point line and try and deny him catch opportunities on the wing? No. I think that's one of the differences between someone like him and Knueppel. But for Houston and for Udoka specifically, who doesn't run a ton of off-ball action, probably isn't going to best utilize someone like Knueppel off of staggers and pins, maybe someone like Carter Bryant, who's more of a natural fit into that offensive identity, could make a good deal of sense at pick number 10. And the Rockets, Well, guess what? That defense gets even better here with another guy who projects to be a very, very, very strong defender in the NBA, utilizing a lot of those athletic gifts, that really strong frame that I mentioned earlier, and some really good mirroring skills when it comes to guarding the basketball. Ball contains one of the most underrated things in all of basketball. It doesn't get talked about enough. People are so focused on steals and blocks. They're so focused on turnovers. They just don't pay attention to drives stopped and just being able to mirror ball handlers. You look at how good Amen Thompson is at that. Carter Bryant's going to be another strong addition into the Rockets' point of attack defensive crew, which is already one of the best in the league at this point. Pick number 11, the Portland Trailblazers here. Now at this spot, I think a very fascinating discussion. I think the Blazers are low-key a buyer option at the draft. Last year, remember, they traded pick number 14 and another future asset out for Deni Avdija. I thought that was a brilliant trade for Portland. Avdija provided a lot of great value in his first season with the Blazers. And I think moving forward, Portland could look to try and package this pick with some salary, whether it was Anthony Simons or perhaps you look at someone like Jeremy Grant if they want to get off of that contract, which could be good for them long term. The Blazers do have some meaningful ways to improve their team if they want to make a buy now move on a player. But nonetheless, 11th overall, Portland here I have taking forward Noah Essengue out of Ratio Farm Ulm, and I think they're looking for someone who can have some real productivity skills off of the basketball, and I think that's predominantly what you're getting here if you do walk away with Essengue. I think one of the biggest things for Portland, they are still looking to invest further and further into Scoot Henderson's development. Reports right now about Chris Paul being a possible target for them as a mentor option. I think that would be really, really good for Portland. But then specifically, Essengue, if you look at what he's been able to accomplish in Ratio Farm Ulm in Germany this year, playing off of someone like Ben Saraf, who is an on-ball prospect coming into this year's NBA draft class, Essengue is a guy for me who, 11th overall, I think, it's a little worrisome that there are some flaws in his game. Hasn't shot the three ball very well, but there's a lot of play finishing tools to work with. He's a very athletic, fluid player out on the perimeter for his size. And I think, kind of moves like a gazelle a little bit. Now, I think there are some limitations. Functional play strength is one of them. But cutting off of Donovan Clingan is something I could definitely see being of value for Portland. And Essengue is someone who's very good at that. Works off the baseline well, cuts out of the corner, plays in transition very smoothly. There's a lot of tools, and I think his free throw rate is a very good indicator of his athletic gifts and how much he can put defenders at a disadvantage where they ultimately have to foul him to stop him from scoring an easy basket. So for Portland here, this is a developmental pick, one that I think could help Scoot Henderson, having another off-ball cutter player who can catch lobs and play off the baseline a bit. But I think there's much needed development here yet for Essengue. It's not a home run, hey, he steps in day one and is an elite player. I think that would be unfair to expect of anyone getting picked at number 11 or later in a draft class. But I think Essengue, there's real tools here to work with, and I think he can be an impactful player pretty early in his career if he lands in the right context. Pick number 12, the Chicago Bulls here at this spot. And I absolutely love this pick for Chicago. With the 12th overall pick, I have the Bulls here selecting center/forward Derik Queen out of Maryland. One of my favorite prospects in this entire draft class this year. I have him ranked 3rd on my big board, which I know is somewhat unpopular, but if you look at his dribble, pass, shoot skills, he honestly plays like a bigger guard, standing at 6'9" without shoes on. He's a legitimate 6'10" plus big man with a 9'1" standing reach, had very similar measurements to Thomas Sorber. Now, not quite the wingspan Sorber had, but a better standing reach, which is pretty strange, all things considered, given how long Sorber's arms are. And I think it's, Queen is a little underrated at this point in the process, I think, by most. I think some of the things that they're looking at specifically are, some of the concerns around block percentage, steal percent. Like, there's a lot of assumed defensive limitations because of his athletic profile, which I understand. But at the end of the day, he had the same steal rate and block rate, basically, as Asa Newell. So, Asa Newell, one of his biggest selling points for a lot of people is defensive versatility. he had the same numbers in a lot of ways as Derek Queen. Now, I do think Newell's a little bit more athletic, a little bit more mobile out on the perimeter laterally, but Queen did showcase a good deal of movement skills at Maryland, where he contested on the perimeter without fouling, was able to force misses out beyond the arc, and also walled up pretty well inside the arc. And then I think from the offensive end of the floor, you're looking at a guy who could be a really fun pairing with Kobe White, one of the better pull-up shooters in the league, one of his biggest emergent skills over the last couple of years, using Queen as a short roller, using Queen as a dribble handoff guy, finding ways to pair him up with Matas Buzelis moving forward would be quite fun. I think all things considered here for Chicago, you're getting an extremely talented big man, one that I think would be the future big of the Chicago Bulls. Now, whether you want to pair him with another 7-footer down the road or not, I think that's a legitimate question, but I think that's one of the things I like about Derek Queen is he has a lot of lineup versatility. You can play him as a big at times against smaller teams if you want to play a little bit quicker. You can play him as a 4 with another big if you want to just win on size, which has been extremely popular the last few years in the league, as it should be. Size is always important. Skilled size is always a premium. And to me, Derek Queen is kind of the definition of skilled size in this year's draft class. Pick number 13, the Atlanta Hawks here now at this spot. And I think for Atlanta specifically, they have a few different ways that they could go about building. They could look at kind of shoring up their center play. That's a big question for them at this point. Capella is headed toward free agency. Onyeka Okongwu, of course, is a little bit of a smaller center, but someone who did take over that center job down the stretch of the season this past year. Or they could look at more playmaking juice. And I think with a lot of the reports right now, with Egor Demin specifically being a very likely lottery pick this year, 13th overall, I have the Atlanta Hawks selecting Egor Demin and utilizing him as another playmaker for their offense. I think specifically when Trae Young goes out of the game, they just lose a lot of that playmaking juice. And while I'm not the biggest believer in Egor Demin as a point guard, I do think his passing skills could add a lot of really good connectivity there for the Hawks. One of the things that they had going for them before injury this year was Jalen Johnson kind of functioning as a higher volume ball handler, a short roll weapon who could just be so dynamic once you get the ball in his hands. And I think Egor Demin, while this isn't probably what a lot of people are envisioning right now, if you use him as a screen and dive player where you get him the ball in 4-on-3 advantage, that's where you probably can maximize a lot of his playmaking skills. He had a very gaudy assist rate this year, but also a very high turnover rate. I think when you ask him to deal with ball pressure and put him into traffic, there's going to be some limitations and some challenges he has to overcome in his development yet. But if you scheme him open, if you scheme him into advantages early in his career, and Trae Young's one of the better advantage creators in the league, always top 2, top 3 in the league in points responsible for when it comes to creating for teammates and himself, I think Egor Demin, putting him into a context where he's playing off of an already great creator, this is where you're going to be able to maximize some of those connectivity skills, kind of a la Nick Batum a little bit with the swing passing. But I think Egor Demin a little bit more Josh Giddey in his game when it comes to the high leverage, difficult passes, the risky passes into traffic that are somewhat turnover averse. I still think there is some significant value here for the Hawks to uncover. It's going to take a little bit of while. I'm not a huge Egor Demin believer myself when it comes to where I have him ranked on my big board. I think there are some limitations when it comes to his handle and stuff. But from an optimistic viewpoint, the passing skills are very legit and valuable in a big way for Atlanta at number 13. At pick number 14 now, the San Antonio Spurs here. With this pick, after going with Dylan Harper at number 2, I think the Spurs, they typically, in my most recent mocks, have looked at someone like Carter Bryant or Noah Essengue, kind of bigger, athletic forward wing types who can defend the basketball, bring some of that point of attack defense. But with them off the board here, I kind of wanted to pivot and go a different direction, something I haven't done frequently for San Antonio, which is address the center spot for them. Spurs fans, I want to know what your thoughts are down in the comment section below. Would you rather draft a forward at this point or a center prospect? 14th overall, I have the Spurs selecting Thomas Sorber out of Georgetown. And if you're trying to sell yourself on this pick, look at the Spurs defensive rating when Victor Wembanyama is not in the game. Their team defense is putrid without Wemby. Of course, he is so big, long, and athletic that he covers a multitude of sins defensively for a team. And I think with continued growth of some of the Spurs' current players and as they mature, get a little bit older, that defense will naturally improve anyway. But getting another defensive rim protector here like Thomas Sorber could change the identity of this team significantly when Wembanyama is out of the game, and it gives you someone who is a little bit of injury insurance throughout the course of a long 82-game season. If Wemby has to miss time here or rest a certain game, it gives you another guy who can step in, protect the rack. Had a very gaudy block percentage this past year for the Hoyas, and I think going forward for San Antonio, he's a very projectable fit. He has some playmaking juice, and I think in a lot of ways can maybe play up to the play style type that Wembanyama exhibits, where he functions out of short rolls. Now, he's not going to be the isolation weapon that Wemby is, of course. He's not nearly as good as Wembanyama. I'm not trying to suggest that. But I think there is the ability to kind of have some continuity in your offense, even when Wembanyama comes out of the game because of Sorber's playmaking, his face-up game out of the mid-range, and some emerging touch. Now, I think there's a lot of growth yet that needs to occur. Shot just 16% on three-pointers this past year on very low volume. The two-point jump shot I thought was rather sporadic, and at times around the rim he did miss a couple bunnies that I thought were kind of a display of lack of focus, or maybe just missing a little bit of that detail when it came to rim finishing. So there's definite areas of growth for Sorber. I'm a little bit lower on him than most in this process, but I do think he will draw some looks in or around the lottery this year in the draft class. For the most part, most recent mocks, I think the lowest I've had him go is 22. When you get to this range of the draft, the difference between pick 14 and pick 22 really isn't as significant as you would maybe think initially. And for the Spurs, taking someone here who can protect the rim for them and really uplift that defense when Wemby's off the court, I think is a point of value for them to perhaps address in this year's draft. Now, they do have a second-round pick. Maybe they look at a big man there instead. Again, Spurs fans, I want to know what you think, but Sorber at 14 I thought was an interesting discussion point in this mock draft today. Moving on to pick number 15, the Oklahoma City Thunder here now. This pick via the Miami Heat, of course, who limped their way into the playoffs and gave Oklahoma City a pick that they really didn't need this year. The Thunder are so good. Like I said last mock draft, they could really burn this pick. It wouldn't even matter for them. But it's an opportunity to add more depth, get a little bit better. So 15th overall, I do have the Oklahoma City Thunder here, selecting wing Cedric Coward from Washington State. This is a really interesting prospect, one that for the last couple of mock drafts, I've been trying to find a landing spot for him in the top 20. And I kind of sat back and really thought about it, and I was like, why not Oklahoma City at 15? This team really could use just a little bit more shooting on their roster. Now, they all shoot the ball very, very well, but at times they can be somewhat hesitant shooters. I think Coward a little bit more ready to shoot as a player. I think you put him in, have him space off the wing whenever SGA gets nail help, which happens all the time, by the way. Coward's ready to let that thing fly. Had a pretty impressive assist to turnover rate this past year, too, in his 6 games for Washington State. Shot 70% on 2-pointers, over 40% on 3, so he was extremely productive in his 6 games for Washington State. Now, again, the sample size isn't huge, but you go back to his Eastern Washington film and tape and stats there too, and there's a lot to love. So I think Oklahoma City here, maybe they take the swing on a player who measured in at 6'5" without shoes on, a 7'2" wingspan. This is a guy who can definitely have an impact defensively, a very impressive block rate in his 6 games for Washington State. There's some real value to work with here if you're Oklahoma City, and for a team that really doesn't need to get much better right now, I do feel like they addressed something that they could use, which is a little bit more shooting without sacrificing some of that defensive length and athleticism that obviously has become so impactful and important to their team identity moving forward. Pick number 16 now, the Orlando Magic on the clock here with this pick. They have, of course, 2 first-round picks this year at number 16 and 25 in this draft. And 16th overall, I think for Orlando specifically, there's a variety of ways they can look, but we'll go with the center spot here, drafting Asa Newell out of Georgia. And I think what I really like about this for Orlando, first of all, the Magic, I think they are going to be pretty hesitant to draft a smaller guard. Last mock draft, I talked about Jase Richardson as a potential option for them, but a lot of Magic fans said, and I think rightfully in the comment section, that they're not sure if Orlando would really do that. That's just not their draft strategy historically. If you look at their recent history, they're looking at bigger wings, guys with playmaking feel as forwards. Tristan Da Silva, Jett Howard, of course, was a pick. Anthony Black, a bigger guard a few years ago. Then you look at the Banchero, Franz Wagner selections. They're not looking for these small offensive-minded guards as much. So with that in mind, we're going to look at improving their offense in other ways. And Asa Newell is a guy who gets on the offensive glass at a very, very high rate, over 3 offensive rebounds per game this past year for Georgia. Now, his total rebound rate wasn't insane, but I do think, all things considered, he can definitely get active. He can screen and dive, play out of the roll a bit, very intriguing touch moving forward, and some defensive versatility. I talked about it earlier with Derik Queen. His steal and block rate were very identical to Derik Queen's, but I think Newell a little bit more mobile on the perimeter, a little bit more hedge and recover versatility, and just a little bit longer as well. So I think, all things considered here for Orlando, this is a guy who can definitely have an impact for them defensively, which is super important in Jamal Mosley's system, but then offensively can really get after it on the offensive glass as a screen dive player, playing out of the pinch post a little bit, and then also out of the dunker spot. I think if you're trying to maximize Asa Newell, you want to see him get on the rim a little bit more, get above the rim a bit more. That'll be kind of a challenge early in his career to maximize, especially there in Orlando with their team context, I think. But it's definitely something that he can continue growing on and blossoming his game in moving forward. Pick number 17, the Minnesota Timberwolves here now on the clock, and I think the Timberwolves are such a fascinating team to talk about, especially leading up to the draft. It might give us an indication of what they do in free agency. Nickeil Alexander-Walker's a free agent. Both Naz Reid and Julius Randle have player options. This Wolves team is still quite expensive even after the Karl-Anthony Towns trade, although they do have more long-term flexibility in terms of money saving down the road without Cat's long-term contract there. But the Wolves in the short term still have a lot of money committed to their roster, and depending on what that Naz Reid deal looks like, a Nickeil Alexander-Walker contract, if they keep him, they might stay expensive for a while. So hitting on this pick, very, very important. Of course, they drafted Rob Dillingham last year. I would say hold the patience with him. He was a smaller guard, didn't get a lot of minutes. Give him a little bit of time, give him a little bit of grace. And at 17 here, I have the Minnesota Timberwolves selecting forward Rasheer Fleming out of St. Joseph's. The Wolves have been mostly built on defense. This team, the offense has never really been truly elite under Anthony Edwards. It's been good enough. The defense has been dog-like for a while, and I think for the Wolves, if you can come out and get another really big forward, 6'9" with a 7'5" wingspan, Rasheer Fleming measured in brilliantly at the NBA Combine. I do think there is some legitimate small ball 5 potential here, but at the very worst, some real point of attack, versatile power forward play that he's going to be able to bring to Minnesota. And with questions about Randall's future in Minnesota, questions about Naz Reid's future in Minnesota, I think Rasheer Fleming is a very, very safe bet for them at this spot. Shot over 39% on threes this past year for St. Joseph's. Very low usage rate for his actual scoring volume, which I think is an interesting point to mention here as well, which I think fits really well with Anthony Edwards. As the Wolves continue leaning more and more into Edwards as a lead guard, and then of course giving Rob Dillingham a little bit more leash to play with as well, I think the biggest thing for them is finding guys who can be effective play finishers, cutters, and shooters out of the corner. Rasheer Fleming projects to be those things and give you that defensive versatility when it comes to extra added rim protection, a competent point of attack defender, someone with just really great size and physical tools to work with. Rasheer Fleming, I think, gets the job done here for the Wolves at number 17 in this mock draft. Moving on to pick 18, the Washington Wizards here now via the Memphis Grizzlies, and with Washington already having selected Knueppel in this draft, 18th is an opportunity for them to come back and try and address another big need for them long term. So here I have the Wizards selecting forward Collin Murray-Boyles out of South Carolina. I think there's a real discussion right now that the best landing spot for Collin Murray-Boyles would be next to a stretch big man. Well, in Washington, you do have Alex Sarr, who is a stretch big. Now, I want to pump the brakes on that just a little bit, though. I'm not exactly certain that Collin Murray-Boyles' best landing spot is next to a true stretch 5. And the reason for that specifically is matchup versatility. If you're defending Washington and they have CMB and Alex Sarr both on the court, what's preventing you from putting your power forward on Alex Sarr, switching ball screens, trying to limit the pop game of Alex Sarr, and putting your 5-man on Collin Murray-Boyles and helping off of him? I think you're starting to see kind of the flaw in that logic a little bit, where unless you have a super dynamic stretch 5 who can post up and is stronger than every other 4 in the league, and like you're talking like the Wembys who's so tall, or the Nikola Jokic who you just have to have a center on him because he's so big and strong, like I honestly think Collin Murray-Boyles next to a delay action big like a Donovan Clingan would make maybe more sense. And it's kind of a tricky topic, right? Because you would think, well, you want the spacing, and obviously three-point shooting is super valuable. You guys know how I feel about that. But it's a tricky topic. I do think for Washington, specifically the reason you still make this pick, even if I do have questions about SAR and CMB together when it comes to how teams are going to match up with you, the reason you make this pick is your defense is going to be really, really good. You know, we went with Knueppel earlier. I talked about the value of their defensive infrastructure and how they're building that up in a very good way. Well, Collin Murray-Boyles is one of the better defenders in this draft. Very active defensively, multiple effort guy, wins with his positioning, IQ, and his want to. And I think if you look at his efforts on closeouts, the actual technique on his closeouts, his impact around the rim where he had a very strong block percentage this past year for his size, this is an impactful player. This is a guy who, for Washington, they're going to get good results from defensively. And with Coulibaly and Keyshawn George and Alex Sarr and a lot of the other pieces they already have in place there in Washington defensively, Collin Murray-Boyles is just a little bit more icing on top of the cake, and I do think this makes their defense very, very scary moving forward. Pick number 19, the Brooklyn Nets here now on the clock via the Milwaukee Bucks. And after going with Kasparas Jakucionis at number 8, the Nets come back here at number 19 and select forward/center Danny Wolf out of Michigan. One of my favorite talking points about Brooklyn this year has been the increase in dribble handoffs and just the handoff play style in general for Brooklyn. They had a near 70% increase in dribble handoffs from a year ago. Of course, that is a more integral part of Jordi Fernandez's team offensive context. And for Danny Wolf, who at Michigan really wasn't the best offensive player, all things considered, you look at his individual offensive rating and you compare that to other college basketball prospects, it wasn't great, but I think that's kind of a testament to how overtaxed he was with being literally the primary go-to scorer creator for Michigan. I think in a role where he's playing off of others creating and playing out of the pocket, playing out of the short roll, playing out of advantage a little bit more, that's where you get to fully maximize some of his other tools, the big-to-big passing, which could be really fun with Nick Claxton or Day'Ron Sharpe moving forward for Brooklyn. Or you get to use him as kind of an inverted ball screener, right, where he's handling the basketball and someone else is setting screens for him. This is where there's a lot more value for Brooklyn moving forward, and at 19, I definitely think this is kind of in that draft realm where selecting him makes sense. And with Brooklyn's play style, some of the questions about who's going to be there long-term in that front court, they've given opportunities to Noah Clowney. Nick Claxton could be a trade candidate. I do like Day'Ron Sharpe. I think he'll be in Brooklyn for a while. I just think all things considered, Danny Wolf at 19 is a very, very strong option for the Nets. And after going with Jakucionis, they get another skilled player who can put the ball on the deck, make plays for others, and has some shooting juice as well to continue building on. I don't think it's at a polished version quite yet, but he's going to have a little bit of time to grow and continue adding to his offensive game as a play finisher as well. Pick number 20, the Miami Heat here now on the clock. Remember, they owed their first round pick over to Oklahoma City in this draft, but they do have this pick at number 20 via Golden State through the Jimmy Butler trade. And 20th overall, I have the Miami Heat selecting guard Jase Richardson out of Michigan State. This is a dream outcome, in my opinion, for Miami. Prior to the NBA Combine measurements, I think a lot of people were anticipating Jase Richardson to be a lottery pick or a very near fringe lottery pick, kind of in that 11 to 16 range on draft night. After, I think lackluster measurements, measured in with a +5 wingspan, which was quite good, but just 6 foot, 0 inches, and a ½ inch on top without shoes on. He's just a 6'2" guard, and he wasn't really a true point guard. You look at his usage rate, it wasn't really incredibly high. Now, the assist to turnover rate's respectable. The assist rate in general is pretty good. This is a player who has significant dribble pass shoot skills, and I think for Miami, this is what you're betting on. You need a player who can score, play off the catch, and shoot the basketball. And I think if you look at Erik Spoelstra, what he's been able to accomplish with a variety of lesser skilled guards, I'm talking the Kendrick Nunns of the world. I'm talking Gabe Vincent, who got, Erik Spoelstra got that guy paid, which is still incredible to me. Erik Spoelstra has done really good stuff with non-skilled guards. Imagine what he can do with someone like Jase Richardson. I think this is just really good. The Heat have a fun defensive infrastructure kind of in place already. If you look at the long-term pairing of Bam Adebayo and Khalil Ware, I think the two of them can be a really, really sound back wall for a team defense. Now, the point of attack defense still needs some work outside of Haywood Highsmith. Like, you're not going to have an elite point of attack collection of defenders with Thiero and Duncan Robinson in that mix, right? But Jase Richardson is active defensively, quick hands, knows how to position himself. He's definitely a competitor on that end of the floor. So I think for Miami, with the pieces they already have in place, taking a stab at someone like Jase Richardson, who falls a little bit in this mock draft because of his size and measurables that some teams are going to have questions about, this is the guy who I think makes a lot of sense at number 20 if he falls this far. Moving on to pick 21, the Utah Jazz here. Remember earlier they went with Trey Johnson, and I talked about the value of adding play finishing skills and more guys who can put the ball in the hoop and specifically are a threat from the perimeter. 21st overall, Utah is going to double down on that philosophy in this mock draft, going with Will Riley out of Illinois, someone who has, again, for a wing forward type, standing at 6'8" without shoes on, I think measured in very, very well at the combine. I think impressed a lot of executives and GMs in that realm. And he has significant dribble, pass, shoot skills for a player of his size. Can put the ball in the deck. You saw a lot of flashes this year at Illinois for him passing the basketball, spraying it around the court off of dribble drive penetration. And then, of course, the big swing skill for him, and something that if you believe he can be a very effective player and an efficient player in this play style, it's his dribble pull-up. I continue talking about this. This is the kind of shot he's going to get if Walker Kessler setting a screen for him with drop coverage defense. He's going to be able to get to that mid-range pull-up a lot on the basketball. And I think when it comes to playing off the catch, playing off of someone, whoever that 1A player ends up being down the road for Utah, playing off the catch, that's where he can get to the one dribble pull-up off of closeouts, take what the defense is giving him, and then the shot-making talent, I think, projects for him to be a long-term good shooter in the NBA. I do think it'll take a year or two for him to really level out and find that consistency and stability as a shooter. But this is a player who has, I think, Danny Ainge type of tools. Danny Ainge looks at these wing forward prospects with significant skills and on-ball talent. Will Riley has a lot of that, showcased it throughout his high school career, definitely showcased it a bit at Illinois as well with a pretty solid usage rate and some decent outcomes. Not great outcomes all the time. There was quite a bit of inconsistency, and I do think one of the biggest problems, and this is an area that's not going to help Utah, and Jazz fans might grunt at this, Will Riley has some defensive flaws for sure. Very low steal rate, very low block rate, was very unimpactful defensively. Of course, he's very thin and frail at this point in time. So for him to come off the board at 21, there is a bit of risk here still for the Jazz, and it really stems from his defensive value and then still making that bet that his shooting and offensive game is going to come around enough to warrant him receiving high minutes. And I think that's going to be a tricky long-term topic. But for the Jazz, they're looking for players who can put the ball in the hoop, and Will Riley projects to be someone who's going to be capable of that down the road. Pick number 22, the Atlanta Hawks here now on the clock. After going with Egor Demin at number 13, I think Atlanta is in a spot where they're looking to probably kind of round out more of their rotation. Now, they could look center here, but I just don't love the center options enough for them to take one at 22 with Thomas Sorber off the board. So we're going to maybe plan on Atlanta either trying to bring back Clint Capella in a reduced role, cost-controlled contract, or finding some other big man on the market for relatively cheap to address that need if we're not going to draft one here at 22. So 22nd overall, I have the Atlanta Hawks selecting forward Nique Clifford out of Colorado State. I think they just go BPA here, someone who I know a lot of teams are going to have with a near lottery grade on, maybe even a true lottery grade in this year's draft cycle, because he has a well-rounded skill set. In past mock drafts, I've talked about other multi-year college players, older college prospects who were labeled as well-rounded, and examples of that come to mind are Wendell Moore and Chris Duarte. Now, I think Nique Clifford is a bit better than either of those two guys. I think Clifford's got more juice with the ball in his hands than Wendell Moore Jr. ever had. And I think in comparison to Chris Duarte, Nique Clifford has a much higher defensive floor. And I think with that in mind, and a better playmaking floor as well. So I do think Nique Clifford, even though those are two guys I've brought up in the past, I do think Clifford's a better player than either of them. So for Atlanta, you're looking at a guy who can take a little bit more of the heat off of Trae Young, create a little bit more for your offense without sacrificing that improved defense that the Hawks have been really focused on building over the last couple of years. While yes, this still leaves a bit of a hole at the center spot moving forward, I think the Hawks with these two picks, walking out with Egor Demin and Nique Clifford, get two bigger wing slash guard types a little bit who can handle, create a bit for themselves and others. And Clifford, of course, one of the biggest things is that stabilized three-point shot, which has been so much more effective and efficient the last few years than when it was when he started his college career at Colorado. Pick 23, the Indiana Pacers here now. Indiana, what a run it's been in the postseason for them. Really happy to see their success, all things considered. And I think at the heart of it has been Aaron Nesmith. I mentioned him earlier and the value his point of attack defense has brought for them in the playoffs. Specifically, I think the matchup with Jalen Brunson. 23rd overall, this is an opportunity for Indiana to get a little bit more athletic, add more transition finishing juice, and another guy who projects to be a very, very good team defender. 23rd overall, I have the Indiana Pacers selecting Adou Thiero out of Arkansas. This is a player who, if you go back to his advanced numbers, his first couple of years at Kentucky, even though he was a lower minutes per game player, he had significant impact when he was on the court in terms of creating problems, creating chaos, creating events that led to turnovers and missed shots and blocks. And I think for Indiana specifically, if you can get another really good athlete here in Thiero who projects to be an elite cutter, you look at his free throw rate, you look at his rim efficiency in the half court, you look at his rim efficiency in transition. This is a guy who is an A+ fit off of Tyrese Halliburton. I really truly believe that, and I think for Indiana, if you're looking to bolster your wings up a little bit more, of course, they have long-term questions about Benedict Mathurin. What's his future going to look like in Indiana for the next 4 or 5 years? I don't think anyone really knows at this point in time what that's going to look like. And then Jarris Walker, another guy who obviously they had high hopes for, drafted in the top 10. This Pacers team is so good, they don't have the minutes to go around for some of these younger players. Adou Thiero might not get the minutes right away, but he's a player who I think you get him on a standard rookie contract, give him time to grow and develop. I think the three-point shot is going to be that big question mark for him. Can he develop and grow as a shooter? If the answer to that is yes over time, he becomes a true starting caliber player in the league for a long, long time. And I really am excited about that for Indiana. The functional athleticism here, the ability to jump into the gym. In a lot of ways, he does remind me of OG Anunoby as a player. And I think if you hear that, your ears perk up a little bit and you say, that's a really, really darn good player. And if you get that at 23rd here for a team that already has so much talent as is, it's like a gold mine for Indiana. So I'd be super excited for them if they made this pick on draft night. I'm super high on Thiero myself. I think he's a very valuable player, someone who could be very impactful as a team defender. And I think the Pacers do really well if they walk out with him at number 23. Pick number 24, the Oklahoma City Thunder here, back on the clock again at 15. Earlier, remember, we had them go with Cedric Coward, and now at 24, we have the Thunder here taking center Joan Behringer out of Cedevita Olympia. Finished up his Adriatic League just this past week and led the Adriatic League in block percentage. I think if you're really trying to sell yourself on Joan Behringer as a prospect, it's rim, rim, rim. He's going to be a rim gravity finisher. Above the rim, he has very good athletic tools. He is quite raw still at this point, but when he's out on the court, he can make stuff happen around the rack as a rim protector, a shot blocker, and of course as a rim finisher. And I think for the Thunder, again, this is an example of the rich don't need anything. They have too much talent as it already is. This is about depth insurance at their center spot. Both Isaiah Hartenstein and Chet Holmgren missed some significant amount of time this year for OKC. Getting another big man into the room, someone who has some real physical gifts and tools and can play above the rim at the rate that he can. This is a guy who just is a fit piece for them, a depth fit guy who can make their defense even a little bit better. When you have so many elite point of attack defenders, Behringer's value at the rim, I think, would be amplified to a new level. So for Oklahoma City, this isn't a pick where you're saying, oh, this drastically changes their team next season. Again, if you're OKC, though, you don't really need to drastically change your team. For me, it's really hard at picks 15 and 24 to sit here and try and sell you on, oh, this is a home run pick or this is what they need to do, because they don't really need to do anything. This team is really well built. They have Nikola Topic still in the weight. We'll see when he makes his NBA debut and what that really looks like. But, I mean, Behringer and Coward and Topic getting added to this team is just, it's ridiculous. It really is. Pick number 25, the Orlando Magic here, now on the clock. This pick comes from the Denver Nuggets, back from the Aaron Gordon trade many moons ago. And 25th overall for Orlando after going with Newell at number 16. I do have them here selecting guard Nolan Traore out of St. Quentin. And I think specifically for this, we talked about Orlando probably straying away from that smaller guard prospect. While Traore has his significant limitations as a player, he comes in with very good positional size, standing around 6'5". He's going to be a bigger guard, quote unquote. And I think for the Magic, that's been an extremely important point of emphasis for them in their team construction. They want big, long athletes. They want to be a good team defense. They want to win on the defensive end of the floor. Now, Traore has a lot of room to grow to be a good defender. So this is going to be a process pick for them yet. But this is one that fits their identity in terms of drafting size. They definitely feel like they have a team culture that they can grow players into very quickly on the defensive end of the floor. Traore can definitely be an additive player long-term for them as a passer, playmaker, ball handler. The question really is going to be his outside shot. If you watch him right now for St. Quentin, every single ball screen, defenders are going under against him. He is not respected for his jump shooting. He's definitely not respected for his NBA range three-point shot. That's going to be a real bugaboo for him the first 2 years of his career at minimum. And I think for Orlando, I mean, we saw them draft someone similar in Anthony Black. Not similar in terms of the overall prospect profile, but similar in terms of the offensive shooting limitations as a point guard in Anthony Black. So I think the Magic here, it's a very tricky draft for them. They've drafted a few wings over the last couple of years. You look at De Silva most recently, and then you go into this draft a big man in Newell, draft a bigger guard in Nolan Traore. I mean, it feels like what Orlando will do. The question is, should they actually do that? Should they try and trade picks 16 and 25 instead to improve their roster in a more dramatic way right now in order to help usher in more winning and maybe a playoff series win this next season? I think that's a really legitimate claim for them to try and make and a pathway for them to really consider doing. But Traore at 25, it just feels like what Orlando would very likely consider doing at this spot. Pick number 26, the Brooklyn Nets here now. And I think this is an interesting spot for them as well. After going earlier with Jakucionis and Danny Wolf, we're going to try and address some wing spots for them at picks 26 and 27 back-to-back here. 26th overall, we're going to go with forward Hugo Gonzalez out of Real Madrid, someone who had one of his best games of the entire season for Real Madrid a couple of weeks ago, where he scored 13 points, had a few flashes as a passer, got on the glass a little bit as well, was pretty impactful as a defender too. I think there's a lot of dribble, pass, shoot tools to work with here as a wing forward prospect, someone who right now hasn't been able to consistently display that on tape and film because of the lack of minutes and lack of role he has had playing for Real Madrid this year. But if you go back to a lot of his FIBA tape, U18, he has a very strong track record of productivity and production and value and skills to work with. And I think that's what you're really selling yourself on. You know, teams, like when it comes down to making picks, it's not just about the most recent season. I think that's kind of the tunnel vision viewpoint a lot of fans have. You know, I've been watching these prospects for 2, 3, 4 years now. Some of the prospects even 5 or 6 years, depending on who they are. Like Ryan Kalkbrenner, for example. I mean, I watched him like 6 years ago. So that's probably the first time I watched Ryan Kalkbrenner. So I mean, with Hugo Gonzalez, he's been on my radar now for a couple of years. In my way too early mock, back in last June, I had him going, you know, in the top 10 as a potential option. Now, this season just hasn't kind of played out that way. It hasn't shaped in a way that's given him that opportunity. Had he gone the college route, things might have looked different for him. But Brooklyn takes a swing on that upside here, and some of the physical tools and skill traits that he has as a young prospect moving forward into his NBA career. And I think Brooklyn could be a good place to give him some actual run early in his NBA career. 27, staying on the topic of Brooklyn here, after going with Hugo Gonzalez at 26, they come back and draft a shooter here at 27 with Liam McNeely out of UConn. And I think Liam McNeely specifically, I know people are going to say, well, if he's a good shooter, why didn't he shoot good? I think that's a good question. He was miscast. I think had to do a little bit too much with the ball in his hands this past year. UConn just really didn't have a drive and kick point guard. I think one of the biggest things they were lacking, you go back to, you know, the guard play they had in recent years, Tristan Newton, who was one of the better offensive initiators in college basketball for a while. You go look at Stephon Castle, who was a top 10 pick for a reason, could handle the ball, could get downhill. UConn had pieces around their roster, even, you know, a center like Donovan Clingan who passes the ball so well. they had guys who could play make for others. And I think we saw it in Alex Karaban this year, who had, I think, a real regression offensively when it came to his actual efficiency. And I think that regression is what exactly Liam McNeely experienced, going from playing with Cooper Flagg at Montverde Academy to a whole different beast for the two-time reigning national champion UConn Huskies as kind of a go-to scorer option instead of a spot-up catch-and-shoot player. It was an a-natural role. It was an atypical role for him. And I think for Brooklyn, you get to revert him back to a catch-and-shoot, catch-and-play finish type of role where he's going to be a lot more comfortable. I think he's a very easy, smooth fit into Jordi Fernandez's offense, which has been very, very role player helpful. You look at the way that Dorian Finney-Smith, Cam Johnson, Dennis Schroeder were all able to perform under Jordi this past season. McNeely, I think, very easy translation to Brooklyn's offense early in his NBA career. Pick number 28, the Boston Celtics here now at this spot. I think for the Celtics, a lot of rumors about them blowing it up. Could Porzingis be on the move? What about Drew Holiday? It's hard to really know. There's not a lot of trade packages out there that I like for Boston. I've spent a lot of time trying to figure them out, trying to envision what a trade could look like, and at the end of the day, I almost hate every single one. So I'm not sure what a deal is actually going to look like, but 28th overall, I have them selecting here center Maxime Reynaud out of Stanford. I think for me, trying to envision this pick, I wanted to go with a big man. I think Porzingis is very likely the guy that Boston ultimately cuts bait on if they do decide to do that. Drew Holiday might be a little bit harder to trade, although you never know. I definitely think some teams could see some real value in him. So it's kind of tricky. But Porzingis going into the final year of his deal, a team trading for him could look at him as an expiring salary, a bigger expiring salary that could help them move some money. So it makes center kind of a long-term need for Boston. And Maxime Reynaud, for me, a guy who had significantly increased three-point volume this past year for the Cardinal, and most specifically found some pretty good success as a finisher in transition, an opportunistic play finisher, some respectable rim volume, and overall very, very high usage for a high-scoring player in college basketball. So, for Boston, I think slating him into a smaller role, kind of minimizing his role a bit, will make him even more efficient, hopefully, as a play finisher in the NBA. And I think for the Celtics at 28, you're drafting the physical tools, someone who is very mobile for his size, a true legitimate 7-footer as well. Celtics, I think, are very happy with this pick, all things considered. Pick number 29, the Phoenix Suns here now. At this spot, of course, a bunch of needs, a bunch of different ways that Phoenix could look. They traded for Nick Richards last year. Didn't really patch up the team as much as they thought it probably would. But at 29 here, they could look at a big man, or they could look in the backcourt, which is what I have them doing here, selecting championship guard Walter Clayton Jr. out of Florida. Of course, had a really dynamic tournament run, and honestly a very good college career where the senior season was really the highlight cap for him that kind of solidified his draft stock for a lot of people, where he went from being, this kind of second-round prospect to a nearly certified first-round pick in this year's draft. The Suns at 29 looking for more shooting, looking for more ball handling, creation skills. That's what Walter Clayton Jr. really has at pick number 29 for them. He can shoot the three ball well. This past year, the Suns down the stretch of the year were starting Collin Gillespie. Do I need to say more? The Tyus Jones thing just didn't work out. I'm not sure if he'll be back really in Phoenix or not. The Suns team, you can argue they don't need a point guard because of how small they already are, that they should just try and make it work with Booker and Beal kind of sharing and co-playing the point guard spot. That's not really great for them either, though, in my opinion. So it just feels like a game of catch-22 where the roster is not built in a way that's super conducive to winning right now, and any draft pick they make is going to be overtaxed with trying to fix a lot of the problems. Walter Clayton Jr. can really shoot it, can get downhill, has a creative handle. There's some value here. Does he fix all of the Suns' issues? Definitely not, and it feels like an impossible, insurmountable task to ask for a prospect at pick 29 anyway. Then we get into pick number 30, the final pick here in the first round. That is the Los Angeles Clippers here at this spot. And the Clippers, for years and years and years and years and years and years, have been trying to address the backup center spot, and it really all stems back from the offseason where they decided to let Isaiah Hartenstein go to prioritize retaining or signing John Wall. That decision set this franchise back a long way. Honestly, you can make arguments about how much better the Clippers would be today, how much better they would have been the last half decade if they didn't make that decision. So 30th overall, we're going to try and fix that a little bit here and draft Ryan Kalkbrenner out of Creighton, an older prospect, one who I just got done telling you a couple minutes ago how many years I've been watching him play already because of how old of a prospect he is. He's been on NBA teams' radar for a while now, and that's a good thing. I think, for the Clippers here at 30, first of all, they've shown a willingness to draft older prospects in years past. A couple years ago, took Kobe Brown at this pick. This is a guy who's actually going to be impactful for them, though. Kalkbrenner, very, very, very elite rim volume for Creighton. This guy is huge. Measured in at 7'1" without shoes on at the combine, a plus wingspan. This is a true 7-foot plus center. This guy is massive. And for the Clippers, who are looking for probably 14 to 18 minutes a night of backup center play behind Ivica Zubac, Ryan Kalkbrenner can give you that. He's got good hands, finished a ton of lobs when he was playing with Baylor Shireman and Trey Alexander and Ryan Nembhard in the past. I think if you can put him with James Harden, you're going to have some instant value with his rim gravity, finishing, screen setting, and rolling. Kalkbrenner's a good player. A lot of dunks, a lot of rim volume, very good block rate. This guy's impactful. This is a player who the ceiling's not immense. This is not a guy who all of a sudden you're saying, oh, well, this guy drastically changes our season. But what he does do is really shore up your backup center spot for 14 to 18 minutes a night. And that's what the Clippers need. That's what they've been trying to figure out the last 5 years, drafting Daniel Oturu, Fiando Cabinelli, trading for Mason Plumlee, trading for Drew Eubanks. They've tried every single Band-Aid in the book. None of them have worked. After letting Hartenstein go, this team has just been desperate for big man play. Ryan Kalkbrenner can be the solution to those problems, and I think drafting him at number 30 is super, super simple, smart, and effective for what the Clippers badly need right now on their roster. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you did, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel for more NBA draft content moving forward. Don't forget to leave some comments down below what you guys thought of the mock. Let me know your favorite selections and so on and so forth. Thanks again, and we'll catch y'all in the very next Utility Sports video.